Well, it looks like it's time for another stadium saga to begin. The Chicago White Sox coming out. White Sox weighing options on their stadium, with team saying discussions have not began. With 6 years left on the lease, the White Sox say it's nearing time when discussions could take place on a potential new stadium. So, you know, if you know about MLB stadiums, the current status of guaranteed rate field, it is routinely considered one of the 5 to 7 worst stadiums in MLB. You can take a look at it. Construction breaking ground in 1989, opening as New Comiskey Park in 1991, and then it did receive a ton of different renovations, including changing all of the seats and also chopping off a bunch of sections in the upper deck. But overall, the stadium is very bland. Getting to this article, the White Sox have called Guaranteed Rate Field home for more than 30 years. By the way, I do think the name of an MLB stadium kind of goes into how good it is. Not completely, but I feel like US Cellular was just such a superior name to Guaranteed Rate. It's actually made the ballpark worse. But just moving on. But according to a new report, the team is weighing their options, including the possibility of leaving Chicago behind. So are we getting another relocation potential? You've already got the Chicago Cubs in the city. Would the White Sox consider relocation after their lease ends in 1929? While no decision has been reached, according to a new report from Crane's Chicago Business, Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner and chairman of the club, would consider moving the White Sox out of Guaranteed Rate Field when their lease expires in 6 years. That relocation could be as simple as building a new stadium elsewhere in the city, or it could involve moving to Chicago's suburbs. Oh my God. Again with this? Is this an Arlington Heights 2.0? Or even Nashville? Oh, so we're going a level up, even considering threatening relocation. Of course, if you are the Chicago White Sox owner, you do have a certain amount of leverage, although you will have to pay a massive relocation fee if you decide to move. But it does make sense if you're trying to get as much public taxpayer dollar as humanly possible. Why not throw the option out there and say, we could relocate, we could go to Nashville. It's funny how Nashville has become the de facto, just, you know, place where every MLB team is going to move. I don't even think Nashville is getting another MLB team. I think they're getting an expansion team in the coming years. The White Sox told the publication that they have not yet had conversations with relevant authorities on their stadium situation and pointed NBC Chicago to their statement on it. We have not had any conversations about our stadium lease, a team spokesperson said. With 6 years remaining, it is naturally nearing a time when discussions should begin to take place. So it seems like this is being floated out there. And then just some history. The White Sox moved into Guaranteed Rate Field in 1991 after leaving Comiskey Park, located right next to it, right across the street. And so when it comes to Guaranteed Rate Field, you know, 1991 to possibly 2030, that's basically a 40-year shelf life. I would say that's pretty fair, you know, for a stadium, especially considering I did a video on Guaranteed Rate Field and just how poorly it aged. I mean, like, the second year the thing was open, everyone could tell that the upper deck was just built way too big. And in the early 2000s, they finally decided, after just 12 years, they did decide to reconfigure the upper deck, and it was a good renovation. But overall, Guaranteed Rate Field at this point is a very bland ballpark that doesn't have very many redeeming qualities. So this makes sense. And also the White Sox as a team, it's got to be so demoralizing. They go through that entire rebuild. I do think it is funny. It's like the Orioles and the White Sox did kind of the same thing, but the White Sox weren't bad enough because the Orioles kept getting #1 overall picks. The White Sox got like the 5th pick, the 4th pick. They weren't necessarily bad enough to get the Adley Rutschmans. Also, their timeline was earlier. They had their rebuild earlier, but the idea is, the White Sox ended up winning the AL Central. They were on their way. They were going to have these were supposed to be their prime years. This was their contention window, and it's injury after injury. The pitching's completely fallen apart, and they've got a bad stadium. Their attendance really is stagnating right now when most of MLB is going way up in terms of it. And it's a situation with the lease coming up in 2029. They're floating it out there. Could we be considering relocation? Now, I will say this is not like the Brewers, because the Brewers, the MLB came out and gave them an ultimatum and said, you need to upgrade your stadium, you need to find the money, the $400 million or whatever it is, to do that. It's also interesting, we're really not hearing anything about a potential renovation to Guaranteed Rate Field. I'm guessing that ship has sailed, considering this stadium, in doing some research on it, has gone through many different renovations. Now, it hasn't, changed the actual look of the ballpark, but it has gone through a lot, so I don't really think they would consider another massive renovation that would cost $300 or $400 million. They would probably rather build a ballpark. Now, when it comes to the idea of building a ballpark in a suburb, outside of Chicago, there's a lot of factors at play. Number one, we have to see what the Bears are going to do. These timelines could be very similar, though, because the Bears at this point, for them to build a new stadium, it's probably not going to happen to where it actually opens until 2030, just because NFL stadiums, they take a while to build, possibly like even more than a year in terms of construction time than an MLB stadium. I do still think the Bears are probably going to Arlington Heights, but, they are knocking down the racetrack, or the horse track, I think is what it was. They're knocking that down as we speak, so I still think they're going there, but that whole saga has turned into a bidding war between a bunch of suburban cities and also Chicago, possibly remodeling Soldier Field. This situation, I do think they should probably stay in Chicago, but it is also important to mention, would it make sense for them to leave and go to a suburban city that has a good population, because there are big suburban cities located around Chicago? Would that make more sense, considering there's already an MLB team in Chicago? And also you have to factor in, the crime and stuff. I'm really not going to get into that. Chicago is what it is. There's going to be really nice parts. There's going to be really bad parts, but they are dealing with a significant crime problem right now, and you have to wonder, would that go into the potential decision to move an MLB stadium outside into a suburb? We will have to see on that. The park is owned by the state of Illinois, which financed the construction cost of the stadium to a tune of $137 million. So, obviously that's before inflation. $137 million is a steal. But also the other thing you have to understand, this stadium's gotten a lot of renovations. It wouldn't surprise me if there's been like $800 million at least dumped into this stadium, probably around $1 billion at this point. If you factor in inflation, taxpayers still owe roughly $50 million on the bonds issued to construct the stadium. According to the report, this isn't the first time the idea of the White Sox leaving Chicago has been floated. In fact, the team came extremely close to bolting for St. Petersburg in the late 1980s before the governor, James Thompson, helped to secure state financing for a new ballpark in the city on the south side. Several groups have pushed for an MLB team to either be awarded to Nashville or lure a current team to relocate to the volunteer state, with the Music City Baseball ownership group spearheading those efforts. So right now, it is the early stages of the White Sox stadium saga. Are they going to try and get a new stadium in Chicago? Are they going to try and get a new stadium in a suburb, kind of like the decision that's being made with the Bears' potential new facility? Or do they consider relocation? Do they consider Nashville? I don't know why everyone keeps saying Nashville. I do not think it fits the timeline at all. MLB and Rob Manfred have already made it clear they are expanding. They've hinted at it a few times. They're going to 32 teams, possibly by 2026 once the Tampa Bay Rays stadium saga gets figured out. And I would imagine that Nashville would be a 1A option in terms of getting an expansion team. And it's just like the timeline does not fit for this team to move to Nashville. It wouldn't happen until 2030. It's the exact same thing with, the Brewers. If the Brewers do relocate, I doubt it would be to Nashville. But either way, this is a situation. I think the ownership, they're trying to leverage possibly leaving as a way to get more money from taxpayers for a new ballpark. They could also try and do the Chicago Bears model, which is basically have different suburbs bid against each other to try and get the stadium. You know, that could be another thing at play when it comes to this. When it comes to the actual stadium, obviously, there's no renderings or anything like that. The only thing I can speculate on is I do think, honestly, the capacity of a new Chicago White Sox stadium could be around 40K, but we know they've been building up smaller and smaller. I'm guessing it would probably be around 37K with standing room going up to around 41 or 42,000. But this is a situation we will have to continue to follow, considering guaranteed rate field. There's really no big-time renovations in sight for it. It's kind of, I would say, on its last legs at this point. It's already gotten a bunch of renovations. They don't want to dump more money into kind of a dying stadium. And it's ranked, 25 out of 30 when you look at different rankings in terms of stadiums. I would have it in the mid-20s. It's just very bland. So you can understand with the stadium lease coming up in 2029, there's going to have to be something that gives in terms of either a new stadium in Chicago or possibly a relocation to the suburbs, or just straight up moving the team altogether. We will have to see. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.